Prohibition by John Carlos Siani.
And Andrew Charles Kane. In the wake of the Civil War, men and women around America began a movement to limit and eventually ban the production and sale of alcohol in America. Known as the temperance movement, the push to ban alcohol swept across the nation, promising to end the scourge of drunken men and helping to empower women. Large groups such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the Anti-Saloon League, and the American Temperance Society organized anti-alcohol events, elected dry leaders, and persuaded others that temperance was a good idea. After years of persistence by these groups, Congress passed the 18th Amendment in October of 1919, prohibiting the sale and production of alcohol. Despite this legal action, the consumption of alcohol continued without much decline. While Prohibition promised many short-term benefits, in the long run it weakened the economy, corrupted the government, and provided a market where organized crime could thrive. The economic effect of Prohibition was immediate. When alcohol disappeared from stores nationwide, those stores lost a valuable source of revenue, and the economy went into a small economic decline. The immediate effect of this was the loss of millions of jobs around the country. States also lost tax revenue from lost alcohol sales. In New York, 70% of the state tax revenue was lost after alcohol was banned. As a result, states like New York struggled to finance government programs like welfare. Prohibition cost the federal government $11 billion in lost tax revenue, with the $300+ billion it cost to enforce the new laws adding insult to injury. As this cartoon illustrates, the Treasury had little money to work with. As a result, the infrastructure of the country weakened, setting the stage for the Great Depression. What's more, people still drank alcohol regardless, so the government was paying a price it did not have to pay. Prohibition also created a political climate that fostered corruption. Short on money due to lost tax revenue, government officials became bootleggers themselves, made deals with the mafia, or simply turned a blind eye to consumption. Bootlegging was a lucrative business. A police officer's salary was paltry in comparison to the money one could make from smuggling booze. Charles Fitzmaurice, the chief of police of Chicago at the time, once testified, "60% of my police are in the bootlegging business." Corruption worked its way from the streets into the courts. Many city governments accepted money from the mafia in exchange for shortened prison sentences or even acquittal. The United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York once testified, "Federal judges have told me, and their names I can supply if required, that the whole atmosphere of the federal building was one of the pollution, that the air of corruption had even descended into the civil parts of the courts, and reports were made to the senior United States judge of attempts to bribe jurymen, even in the toilets of the building. Police even helped organized crime operate by acting as watchmen in exchange for mafia protection from other gangs. As most officers were involved in criminal activity, alcohol consumption continued with almost no prohibition enforcement. In America's largest cities, upwards of 20,000 speakeasies, a colloquial term for bar, operated at once. Prohibition did nothing but damage the government. It allowed for dishonest dealing and hypocrisy at the highest levels, as lawmakers, law enforcers, and judiciary officials allowed those who broke laws dealing with prohibition to get off scotch-free.
One of Prohibition's major effects was that it allowed for the creation of organized crime in the United States. The black market created by Prohibition allowed the Italian Mafia to branch over into the United States. Known as the father of the American Mafia, Charles Lucky Luciano organized the Mafia on a national level and worked to maximize profits for everyone. While Lucky Luciano was based in New York, many other mobsters resided elsewhere. One of the most famous Mafia members of all time was Al Scarface Capone. He and the Chicago outfit supplied all of Chicago with alcohol and used the profits to help provide food for the poor. Capone had a huge reach on society, as a writer from the time period, John Landesco, described it as. Alfonso Capone, who first came into prominence as the distributor of liquor concessions, found that with such weapons as bombs, sawed-off shotguns, machine guns, and the threat of being taken for a ride, they need not confine themselves to the beer racket and the distribution of beer privileges. With Capone feeling invincible with the amount of manpower and revenue at his disposal, Chicago, along with the rest of America, became increasingly dangerous. Landesco also describes this increasing fear of the people. Quote, the experienced criminal or the boy brought up in gang culture approaches his troubles with the law as a matter which cannot be met in 1,000 ways. There are friends and fixers, perjury, bribery, and intimidation. With the increasing gangster presence and bigger threat to a clean way of life, many regular people turn to the side of the gangsters. They could offer protection, a stable income, and guarantee no competition, something the law could not do. This had a very negative effect, though, as with every business that turned to the gangsters just meant more influence and power for the gangsters and increased fear for the regular person in society. This danger is emphasized in one of Al Capone's most infamous hits, the Valentine's Day Massacre. The event showed people how dangerous and ruthless gangs could be and eventually led to Scarface's downfall. Prohibition created an alcohol-deficient society where organized crime and subsequently violence thrived. Instead of living in harmony with each other, the prohibition of alcohol caused people to fear for their lives. Prohibition had a very lasting effect on America. It increased the mafia presence in the country tremendously, which simultaneously increased the fear that people had for each other. Prohibition also launched the United States into a terrible economic slump as it could no longer profit off the sale of alcohol. Perhaps the worst consequence of Prohibition was the corruption it brought with it. Due to the gangster presence, the loyalty of every government official was tested, with almost every one of them being bribed to vote or rule in favor of organized crime. Prohibition made one thing clear. With alcohol illegal in the United States, the country could never thrive.